On Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa unveiled a plan aimed at helping the economy recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Ramaphosa announced an economic recovery and reconstruction plan that aims to embark on a mass employment program, committing 100 billion rand over the next 3 years to create jobs. He wants to see re-industrialization of the economy and secure a reliable energy supply within 2 years. All of this while also curbing corruption and bringing corrupt officials to book. On the back of this announcement, all eyes will be on Finance Minister Tito Mboweni when he delivers his much-anticipated midterm budget policy statement at the end of this month. Professor Adrian Saville, a professor at Gordon Institute of Business Science, joins me for this conversation. Professor, thank you for your time, Adrian, and thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. What are your thoughts on the President's economic reconstruction and recovery plan?
Thanks. It's great to be with you. It's got all of the right ingredients. It carries the right message, and it points to all of the necessary things to get South Africa onto a path of improved and inclusive economic growth, and to redress some of the deep ailments, in particular youth unemployment and inequality, and at the same time provide an ingredient that will translate into sustained growth via infrastructure, which is a key missing ingredient. So it's got all of the right ingredients and all of the right messaging. The essence, though, resides in the ability to turn those words into on-the-ground evidence.
I want to talk a little more about the money that I just mentioned in my intro. 100 billion rand investment, infrastructure investment of around 340 million rand. Where will all of this money be coming from?
Well, you know, the President points to almost 300 shovel-ready projects, but as you flag, you know, where will the money come from given our dire fiscal circumstance? We'll get some clues in medium-term budget policy statement in a few weeks' time when Tito Mboweni delivers that. But taken at face value, the cupboard is empty. We know from the ratings agency's perspectives provided earlier this year that there was a rather glib view on the ability of South Africa not only to look after current expenditure, but to manage projected spending. And as things stand, we don't have evidence that shows our ability to contain current spending and divert much-needed money to infrastructure. So, you know, that's sort of a long answer. The short answer is we don't have the money, and we will have to demonstrate or evidence ways in which we are going to conjure up this fresh spending on infrastructure.
And talking about spending, I think something that's very close to that is the corruption that we've seen over the past few months, specifically with the relief funds that were handed out specifically for COVID-19 and everybody grappling with the lockdown level 5 and level 4 specifically. Where does the corruption part come in now, especially when you're talking big amounts like 100 billion rand? Do you think that's being addressed enough?
So the corruption has some second-order effects, most obviously in the form of tax morality, where you've got an economy that's already on its knees, and then people looking at the circumstances of corruption, and it translates into very low tax morality. So we've got a revenue problem that spills over from that the corruption. There's also, you know, sitting in between policy promises and policy delivery, you've got corruption, which, let's just be clear, is not a public sector issue. That is broad-based. It's public-private that are involved in corruption, and that then gets in the way of delivery. And added into that, a further second-order effect is in the circumstances of corruption, investor confidence, both domestic and global investor confidence, remains low. So this issue of corruption has to be squared up to, and I take courage from some of the evidence that's been emerging recently from the actions of Shamila Batoy's office with people finding their way to orange overalls. I think that's a critical ingredient to build investor confidence and to get from that policy promise into delivery.
So this plan stretches over 3 years or around 3 years. Let's bring politics into this discussion now. Do you think this plan could live long after President Cyril Ramaphosa has been unseated?
It's difficult not to be cynical in this circumstance. South Africa is rich in plans. We have many, many plans that have been delivered over the last 25 years. The RDP didn't point to an explicit growth target, but it spoke about substantial transformation. And then from there, we spilled over into GEAR, as GISA, NGP, NDP, and all of these spoke about 5.5% or 5% economic growth. We've now got what looks like a more modest and more realistic target of 3%. If this plan or policy starts to translate into that type of elevation, then there's a good chance we're onto something realistic. And that's what South Africa desperately needs, is forget about shovel-ready projects. We need shovel-ready policy.
And where are those key areas in the economy where we can grow the economy in line with this 100 billion rand reconstruction and recovery plan?
Well, look, there's reference to 300,000 teachers' assistants being brought in. That's an area in which South Africa, for a long time, has run very big deficits in the outcomes of our education system. So there's a chance to bring quick and long-lasting change through the education system. And then there's other infrastructural aspects, most obviously the release of spectrum, which translates into cheaper and more efficient data in this COVID or post-COVID environment, a core ingredient to competitiveness. And the renewable energy IPP is also a very valuable facet that could restore confidence whilst at the same time establishing investment in sustainable and low-cost infrastructure in the form of those renewable energies.
When I look at what lockdown has done, Professor, we lost something like, 2.2 or almost 3 million jobs. Does this economic recovery plan include new jobs that will be coming up as well? You spoke about various industries, including renewable energy, but does that come with new jobs being created?
On paper, yes. It says that it has the capacity to deliver 800,000 jobs in a very short space of time. If we put that up against your number, the 2.2 million that's been reported by Stats SA, and as you suggest, the number is arguably significantly higher. Ruth Hall of PLAS suggests that we could be sitting between 3 and 5 million lost jobs. That 800,000 is a somewhat superficial or partial recovery. Perhaps partial is a better word than superficial. But either way, that 800,000 isn't enough to reverse that 2 or 3 million job loss damage. And even then, if we were to recover the 2 or 3 million jobs that have been lost over the course of this year, keep in mind that we started the year with 30% unemployment rate. And that requires another 6 or 7 million jobs just to get us into a state of a functional and properly working labor market where you've got something that resembles a properly employed society. So we're a long, long way. You can talk about the better part of 10 million jobs away from being a fully employed and fully functioning labor market.
Do you think Tito Mboweni might have a tough job with the medium-term budget policy statement coming up in the next few weeks? And considering the fact that it was postponed by a week or so, does that mean that He's in a tight place come the 28th of October?
Yeah, I mean, tough job might be understatement of the morning so far. He's in an impossible position. He's got an economy that is on its knees, likely to finish the year 10% smaller. Revenue is missing. The size of the revenue gap is, I would estimate, at about 300 billion, which means we have a budget deficit probably in the region of 13.5%, 14% of GDP. The debt to GDP ratio, if you add in the state-owned enterprises and municipalities, gets us to almost 100%. And then in this very glib economic environment, with this yawning difference between tax spending and tax revenue, Labour is unmoving on its demands for wages and to retain jobs in the public sector. It's unsolvable in that circumstance. If you hold that line, South Africa will land up in fiscal crisis. So something has to give here. And you might be able to fix small parts of it with higher tax rates, but there really isn't enough money in the economy. Even if you were to get tax morality back and tax rates higher, there just isn't enough money in the system to pay for that public sector lifestyle.
Professor, before I let you go, do you think that we should be taking cues from other markets or other countries as they come out of lockdown and grapple with COVID-19 and also try and recover their economies? Or should we be doing it on our own in a totally different way compared to the likes of the UK and the US?
I think that's a great question. And there's at least two things I would venture we can gain or benefit from listening to or looking at others. The first is borrowing business models or social models. And by way of example, Bolsa Familias in Brazil shows an extraordinary impact on lifting people out of poverty and redressing, not completely repairing, but redressing inequality in what was one of the most unequal societies. And their spending per person in the Brazilian Bolsa Familias is actually lower than South Africa's social welfare program. So there's a lot that we could learn from that. And what they did was they tied the social welfare spending to things like school attendance and immunization. And instead of putting money in the system, put school feeding in the system, and so on. So there's a lot that we can borrow from other models. I think that's one that we can learn or benefit from engagement. The other is South Africa sits ensconced in one of the fastest growing regions in the world, yet we continue to behave as if sub-Saharan Africa is another place. And so we've got this vibrant and fast-growing neighborhood, which South Africa has the capacity to be a very competitive and constructive contributor and engager in a win-win regional partnership. And I think that's an ingredient that we could quickly bring into repairing and redressing the damage of COVID-19 and well beyond.
Said Professor Adrian Saville, founder and chief executive of Cannon Asset Managers and professor at Gordon Institute of Business Science, chatting to us about the recent economic recovery plan as announced by President Ramaphosa, as well as the daunting task which lies ahead for Finance Minister Tito Mboweni.